We all want to be the one who discovered something first. To be the one who is able to put our friends onto the best new music. Because you never want to be that one person in the conversation who has no clue what's going on because they don't know about the best new music. But it's hard these days because of the algorithms and the internet providing so much content that demands our attention. It can be difficult to sort out the good content from the bad. Only there was someone who could point you in the right direction and put you onto the best new music from this year so far. What is good, everybody? My name is Carson Craning and I'm back at it again with another YouTube video. If you don't know me, I make content here on YouTube about music, art, fashion, but I also have my own clothing brand and I actually have new clothes dropping today, so I'd appreciate if you went and checked that out. Today I am giving you my top picks for the best albums of 2024 so far. Now, let me just say, let's keep in mind that the year is only half over. It's June. So there's a lot of other great albums that are gonna come out throughout the year. But I still thought it'd be fun to talk about my favorite projects which have dropped so far. Now, a few rules for this. First of all, I am not ranking these projects. I'm gonna give you guys my top 4, but I generally don't like ranking projects against each other, especially if they're by different artists and in totally different genres. It just doesn't make sense. It's artistry, not a competition. Second of all, if I don't mention your favorite artist, please don't take it personally. This is just my opinion. And then third and finally, I am counting EPs and mixtapes as albums. In the streaming age, a project is a project. And I think to discount a project because of its label of an EP or a mixtape and not put it on par with an album, we would be missing out. The first album I want to talk about is A Lonely Sinner by Sam LRC. This is like Have a Nice Life or Godspeed You Black Emperor, but for furries. This is a folktronica album mixed with shoegaze and post-rock. Hyper-specific and niche genre descriptors set aside. Pretty much what this album sounds like is, if you're familiar with the Divine Comedy, you know that there's the part where Dante goes through hell, but then there's also the part where Dante goes through the layers of heaven. And this sort of sounds like you're going through the layers of heaven, but instead of everyone being like a person, everyone is sheep, because this album is all about sheep. But yeah, this is a post-rock album, so it's more of like a journey, like a movie or an experience. So not a lot of hooks or melodies or anything like that, but still a really interesting and ethereal listen. Pinball by Mike and Tony Seltzer. This album sounds like Mike was shopping in the refrigerated section of Erewhon, and all of a sudden he was teleported against his will into Cloud City. And like the aliens that live in Cloud City were like, you gotta start freestyling right now. And so Mike is just freestyling with a Hailey Bieber smoothie in his hand. If you don't know who Mike is a pioneer in the abstract rap subgenre, and he sort of gained his following from his unique flows that glide over these very experimentally chopped, soulful, melancholic beats. He's really been at the core of the community when we think about abstract rap, as his releases have sort of set the tone of what abstract rap should be. Last year, his album Burning Desire was a great example of that, which was also one of the best albums of last year. However, just because he pioneered his own sort of sound doesn't mean he's afraid to not experiment outside of it. Recently, him and Earl Sweatshirt have started to dip their toes in more contemporary styles of cloud rap, particularly the sound that's being pioneered by the likes of Evil Gianni and Real Young Phil. And Mike has now decided to dive headfirst into this contemporary cloud rap style with this entire album produced by Tony Seltzer. This is very much different from the regular Mike that we know from all of his other projects. There's a lot of parts of this album that sound reminiscent to Lucki, but if Lucki went off lean and started taking care of himself, like if Lucki started going to therapy, shopping at Whole Foods, working out. Overall, this album is really great though. It's super impressive how seamlessly Mike can switch his style to make these contemporary underground cloud rap tracks. Boy by Two Hollis. This album sounds like it was written by a 17-year-old who was super inspired by Salem, but instead of being in the environment of opioid epidemic rural America, this kid is just really into playing Breath of the Wild and backpacking. Two Hollis is an electroclash witch house artist who is currently a part of the indie sleaze movement that's happening right now. Earlier part of his career and work was certainly more inspired by cloud rap and Drain Gang. However, at this point, he's fully leaned into a more electro-clash witch house sound. The best way that I could describe this album is that it sounds like the soundtrack to a coming-of-age indie film, meaning that this album sounds a lot more genuine and endearing than a lot of his indie sleaze peers who come off sounding comparatively jaded and laced in irony. That's probably on account for 2 Hollis being on the younger side. I think he's around 19, and his youth and fresh perspective work to his advantage on this project. And besides just the overall vibe feeling a little bit more lighter and hopeful, he has this really unique way of playing with his synths and engineering them where they almost feel like organs, and it's definitely worth a listen. Evil Reflections by Glock 40 Spaz and Osama-san. If you're not familiar with Osama-san or Glock 40 Spaz, they are both pretty relatively underground rappers who exist in the trap, plug, and rage scenes of hip-hop. While they both have a lot of similarities in their sound, their flow is pretty different. Osama-san has a more melodic, auto-tuned, buttery flow that sort of just glides over beats. Glock 40 Spaz has a very distinctive, aggressive sound that dominates over beats. However, those differences in their flows really complement each other on this project. The project in many ways reminds me of What a Time to Be Alive by Future and Drake, and how their different styles of rapping play off the beat in almost a good cop, bad cop type way. Osama-san and Glock 40 Spaz's chemistry and how they sort of play off of each other makes for some bangers on this project. As far as an underground project in this sort of category of rap, this is definitely one of the best ones I've heard. It's very grand for a plug or a rage album, and so it sort of feels like both of them have kind of put on a tux to put their best foot forward and to give each song its best. Artificial Boutique by Frail Body. Frail Body is a post-hardcore emo violence skramz band from Rockford, Illinois. And their 2019 release, A Brief Memoriam, is one of my favorite skramz projects from the last few years. And one of the reasons I love that album so much is because it was able to balance the hard, aggressive nature of skramz with more tender moments. And I think this album does that well again too, but in a slightly different flavor. There's a certain nautical quality about this album. Like, this album would be a great soundtrack to a movie about a pirate who longs for his bride who is at shore. At the same time, he is always pushed into these violent, confrontational, bloody sea battles as he is a buccaneer. What I'm trying to say is that this album is really badass, really violent and aggressive sometimes, but then also has these tender moments, and it balances that out very well. Look How Long Lasting, Everything Moving Forward Once by Hammock. Hammock is a post-hardcore noise rock band, and they sound like if Drives Like Jehu had discovered Massive Attack and Death From Above. What's really great about this album is that they sort of break out of the bubble of what a post-hardcore album should be. At its core, this is indeed a post-hardcore album, but they're willing to experiment in a way that their contemporaries would not. Just to be honest, most post-hardcore albums still kind of sound like they're stuck in the 90s and 2000s, but these guys aren't afraid to embrace more contemporary elements, from elements of electronic, a little bit of industrial, much clearer pop sensibilities. And of course, they even go so far as to having a song about brain rot content. This is a super fun, hard-hitting album that has a lot of catchy hooks and replayability that doesn't sacrifice the edge or aggression to their post-hardcore sound. The Death and Birth of an Angel by Falling with Scissors. This album sounds like you're being attacked by a vacuum, and I mean that in the best way possible. Exactly what kind of genre this album is to be determined. There are ambient electronic elements, there is grindcore elements, there's mathcore elements, there's breakcore elements, but at its core, I think it's mainly screamo and metalcore. This is one of the hardest hitting, fast-paced, and sonically dense albums I have heard in a long time. 1 second it'll be this beautiful kind of quick breakcore electronic track, and then the next you'll be bombarded by strange guitar chords, hard-hitting drums, and screams. It sounds as if you have been sucked into the television, really quickly flipping through channels, and as you're flipping through channels, you're being chased by some sort of villain. If you love badass, chaotic, noisy albums that sound like they have ADHD, you're gonna love this. Night Songs by Joyer. This album sort of feels like you're doing a cannonball into a lake on a warm summer day. Joyer is an indie slowcore band from New Jersey. And if you're a fan of the likes of Mk.Gee, Sign Crush's Motorist, and Bar Italia, then this is going to be the record for you. For the most part, this band sticks to the sort of slowcore indie rock technique, but there are also moments where they get a little bit more experimental in their sound, where they are almost more reminiscent of folk or country music, but if it was folk or country music informed by the noisy guitars of Sonic Youth. Cold Visions by Blade. Blade is the underground rap star from Sweden who made a career being a tastemaker and an innovator in the cloud rap, tread rap genre. In the early half of his career, he sort of gained a following for this dark, noisy cloud rap projects that would have these heavily auto-tuned vocals of him that sort of just drowned out the natural sound of his voice. Collaborated often with the likes of Black Cray, Wake Up Filthy, and Young Lean. By around 2020, he really started to switch up his sound to a much lighter tone, to something which I can only describe as like angelic pixie pop, and more on like the hyper pop side of things than it is on the hip hop side of things. And this huge shift in his sound really isolated a lot of his audience. He also got really into spiritualism, and lyrically his rapping became more introspective about that, which I really did like in this era. And then in the last 2 years, he's become pretty inactive. And the last few projects he's dropped have not really kept the same energy. That is until he's dropped Cold Visions, which in my opinion is one of the most insane comeback albums of all time. In this record, he's going back to a darker, noisy, aggressive hip-hop sound, similar to the one he pioneered earlier in his career. Filthy brings more of this sort of rage sound to this album, and it brings this new, swampy energy of production to Blade's sound. All of this adds up to an album that sounds like Blade has had a wretched hunger to insert himself back into the game. This album sounds like it's being played in a hearse with blown out speakers that's driving through the gates of Hades. This album sounds like a drive-by shooting in Roblox. This album sounds like the voices in your head have decided that they want better payment and are now going on strike and burning the whole place down. This album is chaotic, it's weird, it's aggressive, but it also just hits. Album-wise speaking, this might be Blade's best album in his discography. The Great Bailout by More Mother. More Mother is a professor at USC, but she is also a poet and a musician. She's worked with noisy industrial rock bands like Show Me the Body and Jesu, but also collabed with rappers like Billy Woods as well. Her work could often be labeled as avant-garde, as it's often either spoken word poetry or rapping over either harsh noises or sound collages. With that in mind, obviously this album is not going to be for everyone, but if you're someone who appreciates this type of art, this is a must listen. This album sounds like London has fallen, and for some reason the British Museum has laid decrepit and is now flooded, and More Mother is your guide through a flooded British Museum, and like Charon, she's driving you through a boat, showing you room from room and the artifacts that now lay in ruin. She delivers these very apocalyptic descriptions and visions around colonialism and how that's affected people. Not light subject matter, to say the least, but very interesting and very important. This album is intense. It's slightly terrifying, and it's not for the faint of heart. But if this sounds like something you could appreciate or enjoy, I would highly recommend listening to it. Almighty So 2 by Chief Keef. What if Chief Keef went to church? What if Chief Keef was your youth pastor? Chief Keef is one of the most influential artists alive today. He is one of the main and central pioneers in drill music, and he very much blew up the genre when he was only 16. Obviously, drill has changed a lot since 2012. Chief Keef is still very much involved in the genre, and he is still pushing boundaries with his takes on drill. Chief Keef strays away from his normal flavor of drill music, and has taken this project into a direction that is more reminiscent of what is going on with an Evil Gianni, the sort of Brooklyn drill scene, or like a Polo Perks, where the production on this record have these very colorful and lively samples, very different from the beats that Chief Keef is normally known for. He produced most of this project himself, and the samples he chooses are mainly these soul samples that are pretty familiar, but he really breathes new life into them with drill production. And overall, The whole tone of this album is a lot more positive, and it feels like Chief Keef has reached a sense of greater peace in some sense or another. Casual religious themes, and of course the soul samples. This whole album feels like Chief Keef has been baptized, and he decided to record this record in St. Paul's Cathedral. To All the Trains by Shellac. Shellac is a legendary post-hardcore noise rock band fronted by the legendary Steve Albini. Some really legendary hard-hitting albums that came out in the late 90s to early 2000s. When this album was announced, it had been 10 years since the last Shellac album came out. Steve Albini passed away a few days shy from the release. And it is a fitting, badass end to his legacy. This record has some of the best sounding guitar, bass, and drums. Steve Albini was so precise in the way he recorded. This is why he's been such a successful producer for the likes of Nirvana, Pixies, PJ Harvey, the list goes on. And it's a crushing, minimalistic work of metal scraping guitars over grooving, mathy bass rock riffs. Is it the best Shellac record? Probably not. But is it a badass record? For sure. And the album closes with the track, I Don't Fear Hell. Having the last track of your career and life being called I Don't Fear Hell is one of the most badass things I have ever heard. I think it's a fitting swan song for the late, great Steve Albini. Night Killers, Volume 2 by Snow Strippers. You know that one guy in high school who wasn't really popular, but he hung around a lot of the popular people. He probably really liked hip-hop music, sports facts, just one of the bros. You know, this guy wasn't like especially charismatic as his friends were. Like, he was probably really nice, but a little bit awkward. So what if that guy teamed up with the weird girl who used to be into horses, but now she's trying to break out of that mold and show that she's different and cool, a little bit edgy. Both of those people from your high school, what if they teamed up and decided to make electro clash synth pop music? That would be Snow Strippers. While a lot of Snow Strippers' earlier work has been compared to Crystal Castles, in the best way possible, this album is a little bit different from that, and instead it sounds like a hazy electronic nod to Spencer's Gifts. This album sounds like you're wearing weed socks, a snapback, and you're just watching 360 no-scope compilations on YouTube. That is the biggest compliment and best way I can describe this album. Snow Strippers is out there pushing the culture and making innovative, exciting, and a little bit indulgent, but fun music. All right, now I want to just go over my top 4 favorite albums of 2024 so far. Again, these aren't ranked. And the first one I don't think is going to be a surprise to anyone, but it is Charli XCX's Brat. This album sounds like every single influencer from my girlfriend's For You page has kidnapped me, laced me with Molly, and are now beating me with sticks in Berlin's hottest club. Charli XCX, of course, was an innovator and early adopter in the hyperpop sound. In the mid-2010s, her work with Sophie laid the groundwork for the genre and the sound as a whole. As hyperpop has become more popular, she sort of strayed away from that sound. However, with this record, she's coming back to those hyperpop roots, but with a few new tricks up her sleeve. This is a return to form as it is a hyperpop album. She's also clearly taking some influences from some other electronic genres, mainly being indie sleaze, electroclash, and club and dance music. And this works really well to the record's advantage. This has given her music a fuller palette of electronic sounds and ideas to play with and use in this album. So you have these harsh, distorted electronic synths that really complement the unique, punchy sound design that she has utilized in the past. And I want to be clear, this album isn't like a hyperpop song and then like an electroclash song. No, it's her taking elements from hyperpop, elements from electroclash and dance, and putting them together into one completed body or song. She's really great at taking these elements from different electronic subgenres and putting them together. And it creates her most aggressive, hard-hitting sound yet. It's also her catchiest and poppiest album yet. The hooks are super well written. It's sort of interesting to see how indie sleaze has not only played a very heavy musical influence on this album, but also culturally as well. From the ironic album promo and lead up to the song about Dasha from Red Scare. I mean shit, she's even touring with The Dare. All of the elements that Charli XCX is using here are ingredients we have seen before, but the ingredients have not been mixed in this way. And so she creates something very special and just an amazing pop album. Mk.Gee, Rich Haitian. This album sounds like the collapse of an orchestra that the serpent-like MC Leviathan Mk.Gee raps over. Mk.Gee is one of the greatest and most mysterious rappers that have kind of come about in the last 10 years. He's most well known for his legendary run in 2017, where in 2017 he released renowned rap project after renowned rap project, including his magnum opus, The Gat, often regarded as one of the best rap albums of all time. He's a lyrical genius who has a degree in the romantic languages. However, a lot of people don't know that because he refuses to let his lyrics be on the internet. Very secretive, and he kind of gatekeeps his own art. He never shows his face. Nobody really knows much about him as a person. A lot of his most legendary albums aren't even on streaming services. You have to either buy a physical copy for thousands of dollars or scrape the internet to look for a digital download. All of this makes Mk.Gee one of the most unique and uncompromising figures in hip-hop today. 2021, he teamed up with Griselda and released Pray for Haiti. That album received a lot of critical acclaim and even put Mk.Gee onto a much wider audience. But since that 2021 album, Mk has kind of remained on a lower profile. And while he has released a few projects here and there, to me, they haven't felt like they have been on par with the projects he released from 2017 to 2021. That is until today with Rich Haitian. Mk feels incredibly hungry again on this record. From the energy he brings to the bars, the production, all of this makes this project a serious rival to the best Mk.Gee record since The Gat. There's certainly like a punchiness and contemporary feeling in his production that we haven't gotten since The Gat. A lot of the beats in Mk.Gee's discography feature sample-driven, drumless hip-hop beats that have sort of given his music and sound a lo-fi, grainy sound. And while there is a little bit of that in this album feels much more intentionally mixed to have depth to it. Every single one of the elements, whether it's the drums, the sample, or Mk's voice himself, feels like it's been given the room and depth it needs to breathe and really pack a punch. It's by far the most crisp and well-mixed album that Mk.Gee has ever released. And besides just sounding crisper, there's also a shift towards a more contemporary style of beat, like on the song with O3 Greedo. You will also have some of the best bars Mk.Gee has ever dropped in his life on this project. I can't show them to you or read them off or else this whole video could be taken down, but he is really clever at setting up punchlines, delivering one-liners, and elite wordplay. Besides the Your Old Droog verse where he says some very upsetting things about dogs, this album is damn near perfect. And it's likely Mk.Gee's greatest work, only rivaled by The Gat. Orchard of a Futile Heaven by The Body and Disfig. This album sounds like an invocation of divine images that are perhaps too powerful for humans to comprehend. This album sounds like an angel singing over drone bombings. Disfig is a Berlin producer, DJ, and singer, and The Body are an alternative metal band. The Body have been around for 20 years, but in recent years they've experimented with this more striking combination of power electronic, drone metal, and death industrial, which are all pretty obscure and harsh genres. However, all of these genres combined have a very unique sound. They have always expressed a desire to make pop music with this sound. And I think with this record, they are getting very close to that. What The Body and Disfig have delivered is an incredible piece of art. The Body deliver these massive, noisy, electronic soundscapes that Disfig sings over, and it creates this really beautiful and powerful thing. It sounds like it is a piece of opera that was written as Athena's song before she goes into battle and as she is lamenting what the outcome of this battle will be. In some senses, it's very badass and aggressive, but it's also very ethereal and mournful sounding. I don't think this combination of elements and this very specific mood or emotion is evoked very often in contemporary music. It's really hard to think of an example, and the best one I can think of that gets sort of close is maybe that Poltama song by Ethel Cain. Disfig is really an amazing vocalist, and her vocals along with these instrumentations really create a beautiful painting or mass of an album. To me, I get the same feeling listening to this album that I get when I look at a John Martin painting. It's this sort of representation of a divine, powerful, feminine rage that hasn't really been fully expressed in a contemporary setting. I keep coming back to this album again and again, and I'm very much in awe of it. Mk.Gee, 2-Star, and the Dream Police. Listening to this album is like standing by the ocean in a dense, thick fog, and the birds are cawing around you, and all of a sudden, the power lines behind you collapse and make all sorts of electrical noises that make the birds cry out even more. This album is probably one of the most important and groundbreaking indie alternative albums in the last 5 years. And I think it's going to entirely shift the sound of indie or alternative music as we know it. Mk.Gee is an indie-tronica, bedroom pop musical artist and producer. He has worked on writing songs for the likes of Omar Apollo, Vegin, Dijon, Kid Laroi, and even Drake. And he's also released a series of EPs and mixtapes. What Mk.Gee has worked on is creating a very unique, distinct guitar sound and style. And that unique guitar sound is what really is the focal point of this album. This album has the same lush, fog-soaked sound that his last mixtape did. This album is pretty much a bunch of 80s pop-sounding ballads, but with a totally unique and original instrumentation, mixing, and vibe. Again, the guitar sound is the most striking, unique, and the focal point of the album. This very unique guitar sound he achieved by running the guitar through a tape machine. And because of this, when he plays the guitar softly, it has this very unique, warm, hollow tone to it. But then when he plays harder, it has this really violent and striking guitar noise that sounds like metal scraping against metal. It reminds me a lot of Steve Albini's guitar from Big Black, where it almost sounds like an electrical cable or a tape rupturing. Whether he plays soft or harshly, it's a very unique sound. And while these shifts are erratic, the production and mixing really complement it. There are these sort of cacophony of other noises in the production that sort of cough and bark at you. This album sort of sounds like icy hot. In some elements feel very icy and cold, but at the same time other elements feel very warm. And that's a very strange feeling and very hard to balance. The songs are also super catchy and well written. This is really well written pop music that is very well structured and intentional. Mk.Gee knows how to play with tension within his music, using both the song structure to build tension and the wild cacophony of striking sounds. This is one of the most innovative albums in a long time. I don't think anyone else in the indie or alternative scene have created this unique of a vibe or their own distinct sound since Bon Iver. If you were to ask me, I think there will be a lot of copycats of this in the years to come, and I think this album is really going to change the way in which we produce and mix indie or alternative music. That being said, those are my top picks for my favorite albums so far of 2024. Let me know in the comments which album I missed. And again, I have a clothing brand that is releasing today. I'd really appreciate everyone go check it out. Being said, my name is Carson Craning. Thank you for watching this video and have a wonderful day.